Hello everyone, welcome to the Adkup Show. So finally, Trump has spoken to Putin about Russia-Ukraine conflict. This was the first time in the last 3 years that the US president spoke to Russia's president. Biden spoke to Putin in December 2021. There was no talk since then. Trump wrote a long post on Truth Social about his talk with Putin. We'll try to understand and decode his long post with few more recent developments. So here's what Donald Trump wrote about his talks with Putin. It's not every day you hear about these two leaders chatting like old pals, but that's exactly what happened, or at least what we have been told happened. Now, this is the meat of the conversation. Trump's statement highlighted the urgency to stop what he called millions of deaths in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, let's be clear, while the war has indeed been devastating, the exact figures of casualties is not in the media. Hence, millions is likely an expression of grief and sorry. This rhetoric could be aimed at pushing for immediate action, or it might just be Trump's way of emphasizing the gravity of the situation. Nobody knows what the real numbers are, and probably to know the real numbers, there has to be some sort of investigation. There are also many reports of corruptions which took place during the war in Ukraine. The Middle East was also mentioned in his post. There wasn't much details on this, but given the US and Russia's role in the region, it's possible they touched on issues like Syria, Iran, or the ongoing tensions in Israel-Palestine. Then it was about energy. This is a hot topic, especially with Europe's dependency on Russian gas and US trying to assert itself as an energy superpower. With the war in Ukraine throwing energy markets into chaos, discussing energy could mean anything from oil prices to renewable energy transition. But more likely, it's about stabilizing supplies. However, he doesn't mention anything about EU's energy security. It looks like both the US and Russia are trying to ignore EU, or probably trying to enforce their terms and conditions on EU. The major countries in the EU like France and Germany are already suffering with high inflation due to lack of Russian energy. The situation is so bad that many German companies and factories are forced to sell their shares and plants to China. Well, many factories which were closed in EU, especially German, ended up in China. It's very interesting to note that both leaders spoke about artificial intelligence. Both nations are deeply invested in AI development for military, economic, and societal advancements. This could range from discussing ethical guidelines to potential collaborations, or just a nod to tech race where they're both part of. However, we saw a couple of weeks ago how China's DeepSeek wiped off $1 trillion from American market. To be honest, AI race is probably only between the US and China as of now. Trump stressed on so-called power of the dollar. This is interesting because it hints at discussion on global financial dominance and possibly Russia's push towards de-dollarization. Trump might have been advocating for dollar's continued supremacy or exploring how this affects US sanctions and global trade. Not to mention, a couple of days ago, Russia did mention that it's not interested in de-dollarization. Both leaders seems to take a trip down memory lane, talking about their nation's cooperation in World War II. It's a selective view of history, one that emphasizes unity but glosses over World War II and subsequent fictions. It's diplomatic nostalgia, perhaps meant to set a tone of potential partnership. Yesterday, Trump also mentioned that he wants Russia to become part of G7, which actually it was before, but Russia was kicked out because Russia annexed Crimea after what happened in Ukraine in 2014. That is Maidan coup. Trump's statement suggested a future where the US and Russia worked closely together with mutual visits and negotiations. But let's not forget, this is easier said than done, given the geopolitical chessboard they are playing on. It looks like Trump is trying to eliminate Cold War mentality in Washington, which still persists. So in future, there will be less, or probably there could be less, anti-Russia rhetoric. Trump says Putin used his campaign motto. This is probably a personal chemistry which Trump is trying to build. This is either a nod to Trump's style or clear way for Putin to echo Trump's sentiments without committing to anything substantive. It's all about perception here. Trump announced a team of negotiators, including Marco Rubio, John Ratcliffe, Michael Waltz, and Steve Witkoff. These names imply a blend of political experience and loyalty to Trump's policies. The involvement of Rubio, who has been critical of Russia in the past, adds an interesting dynamic. Trump even spoke to Ukrainian President Zelenskyy immediately after his conversation with Putin. This move can be seen as an attempt to keep Ukraine in the loop or a strategic play to frame the US as a mediator rather than a party with vested interests. However, it turns out that Trump wasn't really enthusiastic about his talks with Zelenskyy, and he would probably ignore Ukraine's demands during negotiations. Basically, the people who were pro-Ukraine in DC are no longer, and Trump is not at all interested in Ukraine. Trump administration has also mentioned that Ukraine will not be part of NATO and there will be no American troops in Ukraine, which means there will be no security guarantee for Ukraine from American side. This puts EU under massive pressure. Trump also thanked Putin for releasing Mark Forgel, an American detained in Russia. This could be seen as a goodwill gesture or part of broader exchange deal. It shows some level of cooperation or at least willingness to engage in these kinds of diplomatic concessions. It means that Trump is telling Russia that America is now interested in more dialogues rather than just one-sided rhetoric. This direct engagement by Trump, bypassing traditional diplomatic channels, is characteristics of his style. It's personal diplomacy at its finest, or most controversial, depending on your perspective. However, this approach might sideline allies or complicate existing negotiations, which it will, as EU has already said that any deal behind their back will not work. Both the US and Russia will require EU and Ukraine for any kind of deal they do. At this point of time, EU and also Ukraine are looking desperate. There is a possibility of the entire EU security framework becoming obsolete that involves Article 5 of NATO. Trump has built pressure on EU to contribute more towards NATO, and once he also said in a hilarious way that he would encourage Russia to do whatever it wants with any NATO country if they don't pay enough for NATO. It might sound hilarious, but it became a serious concern for many in Brussels. Trump is trying to put a narrative of only I can fix this, which aligns perfectly with his political branding. However, the number and the promises made here need to be taken with a grain of salt. A real challenge will be in turning these talks into tangible outcomes. Peace talks in Ukraine have been elusive, with Russia holding significant part of Ukrainian territory and NATO's expansion being a major sticking point. Engaging directly with Russia over Ukraine without fully inclusive multilateral talks could be contentious. According to few reports and Russian sources, both Trump and Putin are planning to have a peace summit in Saudi Arabia. Countries like Poland, Germany, and other NATO members will watch this closely, possibly with concern if they are not involved in these high-level discussions. If these talks lead to a ceasefire or even a peace agreement, it would be a monumental shift in Russia-Ukraine relations and could set a precedent for resolving conflicts through direct leader-to-leader diplomacy. Trump is emphasizing too much on this kind of approach. Given Putin's history of using negotiations as a stalling tactic or to legitimize territorial gains and Trump's flair for dramatic announcement, there is a room for skepticism. If this doesn't go as planned, it could further strain relations, not just between US and Russia, but also within NATO and with Ukraine. By the way, as of now, it looks like the relationship between the US and EU will be on decline. Trump is not only ignoring EU, but he's also threatening them that he's going to put a big tariffs on them. It will be interesting to watch Trump and Putin meeting in Saudi Arabia in coming days. Statements from Rubio, Ratcliffe, and Waltz or Witkoff will be worth noting. Their statements would mean a tectonic shift in the DC. The response from other nations, especially those directly affected by the Ukraine conflict, will tell us a lot about the perceived sincerity and potential impact of these discussions. How this plays in the US, especially with elections looming, could influence Trump's political standing or become a litmus test for his foreign policy promises. In conclusion, this phone call is giving a big message and a feeling. A message and a feeling of something significant. Closing of chapter in the long, complex saga of Russia-Ukraine relations. Basically, Cold War lasted for about 45 years, and after that, world became unipolar with US being a sole superpower. But now things have changed. There's probably an understanding in Washington that the US is no longer what it used to be, and things can no longer be one-sided. There has to be a global cooperation. It took more than 35 years for the US to come out of its Cold War mentality. However, there are challenges waiting ahead. Only time will tell if this is the peace push it's framed to be or just another diplomatic dance. Stay tuned, keep your eyes on the news, and let's see how this unfolds. Thanks for watching, and if you found this insightful, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, in the world of geopolitics, everything is about the next move. Let's hope this one is towards peace. Catch you in the next video. Peace out.